Welcome to Novara Live. I'm Helena, aka Nojetis MTG, and I'm joined today, as always, by my wonderful Thursday co-host Dalia Gebrial. Dalia, how are you doing today?
I'm doing okay. I mean, today is not a slow news day. We can say that for sure. So I'm looking forward to getting into the details of the ceasefire, hopefully permanent end of the war on Gaza with you today.
Absolutely a momentous day in terms of hopefully achieving some lasting peace. Speaking of which, coming up tonight, Israel and Hamas agree to a ceasefire, but will it really end the war? I'll be joined by Trita Parsi. Millions of us in the UK are set to pay even more for our water bills, and Robert Jenrick says he didn't see a single white face in Birmingham. Stay tuned for all of that and more. If you'd like to support our work, you can sign up at novaramedia.com/support. Early this morning, Israel signed a ceasefire agreement with Hamas after hours of last-minute wrangling over the details in Cairo. Israel's cabinet is currently meeting to ratify the deal. If they do, the ceasefire could be in place within 24 hours. But of course, that's a long time in which to continue bombing Gaza, with Israel continuing to assault the enclave throughout today. Explosions have continued to rock the enclave throughout the day as Israeli airstrikes continued, hitting areas including southern Gaza and parts of Gaza City. Meanwhile, Israeli tanks were also filmed firing near civilians using the coastal road around the Al-Mawasi zone. So what exactly has been agreed? Well, both Hamas and Israel have signed up to the first part of what's been called the Trump peace plan. US President Donald Trump announced the news on Truth Social late last night, saying this: "I am very proud to announce that Israel and Hamas have both signed off on the first phase of our peace plan. This means that all of the hostages will be released very soon, and Israel will withdraw their troops to the agreed-upon line as the first steps toward a strong, durable, and everlasting peace. All parties will be treated fairly. This is a great day for the Arab and Muslim world, Israel, all surrounding nations, and the United States of America, and we thank the mediators from Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey who worked with us to make this historic and unprecedented event happen. Blessed are the peacemakers." Donald J. Trump, President of the United States of America. Now that's Trump sounding a very optimistic note. And today, the US president said that the hostages still believed to be alive, around 17 of them, will be released on Monday or Tuesday. In exchange, Israel will release 1,700 Palestinian hostages detained since October the 7th, many without any charge, along with 250 prisoners serving life sentences. Meanwhile, Israeli forces will withdraw from built-up, highly populated areas, clearing out of the region marked in red on this map. So it isn't a total withdrawal from Gaza. That may be one sticking point, and there remain others. According to Hamas, what has been agreed is not just a ceasefire, but an end to the war. Senior Hamas official Osama Hamdan spoke to Al Arabi TV to say this: "The main point that allowed us to enter into this deal is that it ends the war. It is supposed to be announced formally. This is what is in the agreement. It is not merely Hamas's position. And this is what the Israelis have signed up to. This is not a ceasefire. It is a declaration for an end to the war." Hamas is also worried that Israel will renege on its agreement while its army is still in Gaza, as it has done in the past, and is demanding security guarantees from the US states and Arab states. Meanwhile, Israel will still be concerned that there is no detail yet about the disarmament of Hamas, with Hamas having previously said they won't lay down arms without full recognition of a Palestinian state. Today, Hamas has also said this: "We will never abandon our people's national rights until freedom, independence, and self-determination are achieved." To take us through exactly what the ceasefire means and how far it gets us toward a lasting peace, I'm joined now by Trita Parsi, co-founder and executive vice president of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Welcome to the show, Trita, and thank you very much for joining us. Let's start with where we are right now. What does this ceasefire actually mean immediately for Gaza?
Well, if it is approved by the Israeli government and if it is upheld through the pressure of Trump on Netanyahu, then obviously the ceasefire in and of itself would be a very, very welcome step. And it can lead to not only the end of this brutal and inhumane bombardment, but also the forced starvation, because we're talking about getting back to the level of aid convoys that was agreed upon in the previous ceasefire. But I think it's important to understand that if it only leads to a ceasefire, it is ultimately a failure. Because Trump is selling this as a peace agreement, not a ceasefire. which means an end to the genocide as a whole. That necessitates that this reaches phase 2 and is not stuck on phase 1, and that Netanyahu this time around honors the agreement and agrees to go on to phase 2. Last time he didn't, and last time the United States blamed Hamas, even though it was Netanyahu who broke the ceasefire. This time around, precisely because Trump has taken such a personal credit for this agreement, there may be less tolerance on his end against Israeli efforts to sabotage the deal and make sure that it never reaches phase 2.
So as you mentioned there, obviously there is a kind of difference in a ceasefire and an end to the war. Obviously, Hamas and Trump clearly are of the opinion that it will end the war long term. And you did mention there would be Israeli attempts to sabotage the process potentially. What are the points where you think the process would be likely to unravel?
Well, I think once you have all of the hostages released, then not that the hostages necessarily was a major factor for Netanyahu. I frankly don't think it was. But I think you will have internal divisions inside of the Israeli government in which some elements of his government want to go back to the bombardment. They want to annex Gaza. They want to use the ongoing war in Gaza to distract from what they're doing in the West Bank, which is a de facto annexation. So they need this war going on there. And of course, Netanyahu himself, for his purpose of staying out of jail and not having to deal with some of his legal issues. So I think there's plenty of risks. And I think we have to be very clear. The only reason this is happening is because, A, the Israelis overreached by attacking Doha. It backfired. It upset the precedent. It changed the balance of the debate inside the White House in favor of actually putting pressure on the Israelis. Secondly, I would add to that Israel is increasingly becoming a political burden for Trump. Israel's standing and numbers are tanking in the America First constituency. And Trump needed to do something to make sure that Israel would not drag him down with it, given the fact that the Israelis at this point seem to be embracing pariahhood, embracing isolation. That is not the direction Trump wants to go in. But it's only because he was willing to put pressure on Israel as a result of these factors that we actually got something here. To make sure that the deal sustains, the pressure also needs to be sustained.
So once the hostages are released and the Israeli military withdraws from some parts of Gaza, essentially, at the moment it seems, it's only really, as you say, pressure from the White House that is stopping them from starting the fighting again once they have gotten what the Israeli public wants, clearly, which is the return of the hostages. There's very little concern for the people in Gaza from the polling that I've seen. Is there anything else other than Trump's word and pressure from the White House and the State Department that would stop them from going back in and restarting it once they've released the hostages?
Well, if Europe wants to get serious and actually impose real sanctions, kick Israel out of UEFA, kick them out of the Eurovision, etc., then I think we can have a serious conversation as to whether the Israeli public is willing to pay the price of that isolation in order to continue a genocide. Right now, I don't think we can have that conversation because none of that pressure has actually been inflicted on Israel. It's only conceptual. It's only in the abstract. Once it's done, then that's when we will be able to say, okay, did that pressure have an impact? Did it work? But so far, we have not seen any real pressure. The degree to which Israel is moving towards pariahhood is because of public opinion in many of these countries and the pressure they're putting on their governments. Not that the governments themselves, in most cases, have done anything that is commensurate with the crimes and the violations of international law that Israel is committing.
What about Netanyahu himself? Throughout this assault on Gaza, it's been reported that keeping the war going is essential for him given his various criminal trials. What's changed now that's made a ceasefire seem more desirable? And what's his future politically if the ceasefire holds?
Well, I think, first of all, desirable might be too strong of a word. I think Netanyahu has been pressured into this. And I would suspect that behind the scenes, there's been a lot of pressure from the White House. He may, however, nevertheless be able to continue the war. He just continues it on a different front, either restarting a war with Iran, going back into a much more intense bombing of Lebanon, he may still have ways to keep the fire alive, even though the fire in Gaza, to a certain extent, will have been put out. I think also it's very important that even if we manage to get to an end to the genocide, which of course in and of itself is tremendously valuable, we are still just getting back to essentially a pre-October 7th situation. The real root causes of the conflict have not yet been addressed, which is the occupation. And until we actually have an end of the occupation and the compliance by Israel of international law, ICJ rulings, then the root causes of the conflict and the conflict itself will continue to exist. Now, of course, first things first, we got to stop the genocide, first of all, and get the ceasefire and make sure that it's permanent. So it's understandable that this is the route that is taken, but it's very important that after these objectives, we don't let up, we don't give up, but we have to continue to have movement towards actually resolving the conflict as a whole.
And with regards to Hamas, the Trump plan calls for their complete disarmament down the road. Do you think that's really on the table for Hamas in the long term?
I suspect that under most circumstances, it will not be, because there is an imbalance here. Hamas needs to disarm according to the agreement, whereas there is nothing that is really required of the Israelis except for just withdrawing from the territory. There's talk about measures that need to be done to radicalize the Palestinian population, but nothing about de-radicalizing an Israeli population that in majority is in favor of a genocide. So there's a lot of significant problems down the road that we will encounter. But hopefully those will not, even if they're not fulfilled in a manner that perhaps would be desirable, hopefully that will not prevent the genocide to end and the ceasefire becoming permanent.
Trita, Parsi, thank you very much today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Much appreciated. While we don't yet know what the next few months will hold for the Palestinians in Gaza, there's almost no doubt that there'll be some kind of pause to the fighting, possibly only a short one. But even that will be a huge relief given the grueling and hugely destructive attacks they've endured since the last ceasefire collapsed in March. The announcement of the deal early on Thursday morning brought an eruption of celebrations in Gaza City, with young Palestinians overjoyed at the idea of peace. That's a concept that will be completely alien to Gaza's youngest inhabitants, whose only memories will be of bombs, hunger, and the constant danger of devastating loss. Those celebrations have continued into today, with Gaza City's first responders as well as some of its last few living journalists joining in the party atmosphere. One of those emergency responders spoke to Reuters.
Honestly, these are indescribable feelings. We can't believe it. But thank God the war has ended and we are alive. Honestly, we hope the war does not come back and for this to be really the end, with no death and destruction afterwards. Hopefully people would return, build their houses, and life returns to how it was, God willing.
Others, though, have been more wary of the news. This woman spoke to Reuters from Khan Yunis.
Every time we used to have hope, they would let us down. We would hope there will be a truce and they would let us down. Until now, the joy is incomplete until the ceasefire is fully implemented. We are happy there is a truce, but let it be an eternal truce and may it be implemented safely. We are happy, thank God, but our happiness is incomplete with hope. Where is hope? Let it be implemented and not just an announcement or for them to let us down in the last phase. I hope it will be seen through.
In Israel, there have been celebrations too. This was the moment the families of the remaining hostages received a call from Donald Trump in the company of U.S. Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick.
President Trump, you have the best crowd in the world. What do you guys have to say to President Trump? Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. You did it.
Wow. You did it. Wow. Thank you.
This is amazing. Mr. President, we believe in you. We know you've done so much for us over the past, since you became a president, and even before that. And we trust you'll fulfill the mission until every hostage, every 48 of the hostages are home. Thank you so much. Blessed be the peacemakers.
God bless you, Mr. President. God bless America.
Crowds have also been rejoicing throughout the day. In Tel Aviv's Hostages Square, crowds have been gathering since early this morning to celebrate the impending release of the 17 remaining hostages held in Gaza. Participants sang songs, danced, and waved the Israeli flag. One Israeli joining the celebrations gave his account of the country's mood.
I couldn't be happier. the fact that finally hostages are coming back, that the deal was signed, that the war is over. It's a happy day. It's a holiday here. That's what we wanted for such a long time. Carmel, my cousin, was murdered in captivity. She's not going to come back. It's too late for her, but it's not too late for 48 hostages who are going to come back. 20 of them are going to come back alive. And this is such a happy moment for us, the families of the hostages. Such a happy moment for all Israelis and for all the Middle East.
Others in Israel struck a more somber note. Amit Shlavi is a resident of Kibbutz Be'eri, the site of civilian massacres by Hamas on October the 7th.
Well, it's about time. We're waiting for 1.5 years, I think, for this moment to arrive. For some of our members, it's too late. But for the family that have still 4 hostages in Gaza, 4 adopted men in Gaza, it's a very, very important day. I think it's a good time to stop the war, to take the advantage of what Trump gave us and start living and be, part of the world.
Dalia, there's lots for us to discuss here, lots of different angles to what we've heard from, obviously, Trita Parsi there, many people on the ground, both in Israel and in Palestine. First, we're going to get your initial reactions to the viability of this ceasefire and what this will say about Israel's place in the world more broadly. And do you think that the changing relationship between the US public and Israel will see a kind of different modus operandi moving forward at all? Lots to talk about.
Yeah, I think those are all really, really important questions. When it comes to my first response, I think, as is often the case, it's a very mixed one. And sort of taking stock over the past 2 years, the first thing I think about is the fact that for many young Palestinian children, especially those who are under 2 years old, who have never had a sustained period of time in their life where they have not been under a genocide, where they have not heard the sound of warplanes circling them, the idea that those children will be able to have peace, even if it's just auditory peace, in terms of the sound of warplanes from the most menacing military that we have ever seen, just from that being reprieved for an extended period of time, is enough to make me feel positive, at least hesitantly positive. That alone is incredibly important. Those are very precious lives. And I think that particularly in the context, when you look at the scale of the daily murders that the Israeli state are conducting in Gaza, every day that there is a withdrawal of aggression is a day where dozens of Palestinian lives will be saved. And that in and of itself is important and valuable. We are also going to be seeing, obviously we've heard about the release of the Israeli hostages, but it's also important to remember that there will be many, many more Palestinian hostages who are being released from Israeli prisons, where many of them are being held without trial. And we will also see the release of the dead bodies of Palestinians that are currently being held by the Israeli state. I think it's the exchange rate, to put it very clearly, is 15 dead Palestinians to every 1 dead Israeli hostage. And I'm using very crude terms here to kind of really bring home the cruelty with which these kind of evaluations are being made. So these in and of themselves are important victories for the Palestinian families that have been suffering as a result of this genocide. We also need to take stock of the global raising of consciousness that has happened over the past 2 years. And this is down to the steadfastness of the Palestinian people and their allies throughout the world. Israel will never be the same on the world stage again. In the course of 2 years, being pro-Israel, unashamedly pro-Israel or unconditionally pro-Israel, being pro-Zionist, has gone from being the kind of enforced dogma to being basically the position of just the most marginal cranks in public life. that rising of critical consciousness around Israel and around the history of Israel and the history of Palestine is going to last for generations. Now, from the Israeli perspective, I think they have made the calculation that, look, there are many, and I've actually heard Israeli spokespeople and outriders making this argument, which is that, many nations, the United States, Australia, Canada, were born out of genocide, were born out of atrocities. And so why shouldn't the Israelis be able to do the same? The United States was founded on the genocide of indigenous people. And, people have by and large forgotten that. And it's not really a question that the United States has to deal with on a regular basis. And Israel has made the calculation that there's no reason why they should not be able to do the same. And that's where our political responsibility comes in to say, look, if we were alive at the time when the genocide of the indigenous people of the Americas was happening, we would have fought then. And so we are going to continue fighting now. Now, when it comes to the question of trepidation, which is obviously if you're not cautious or if you're not hesitant to celebrate this as a win, then you are, you are ignorant of the history, the very recent history of what it means when Israel signs a ceasefire agreement, particularly when it comes to Gaza. Since 2008, I believe, there have been around 6 ceasefire agreements signed by Israel when it comes to the Gaza Strip, and they have each followed the exact same pattern, which is that a ceasefire around, withdrawal of troops, for example, is agreed, or some kind of lifting of a siege is agreed. Israel then breaks that ceasefire, continues to blockade the Strip, continues with its aggression. Hamas then fires rockets in response to that aggression, and then that lays the groundwork for all-out war. And so it would be naive of all of us to not think that could happen again right now. I do, especially because, as has always been the case, there is no clear mechanism of accountability when it comes to what will happen if Israel break this ceasefire or if Israel break this agreement. We do not have an understanding of what will neighboring Arab states do. What will the United States do? What will Europe do? I wouldn't expect to be privy to these kinds of details. I'm not sure if they would be made public to us. But if we are going to if history is the best indicator of what's going to happen going forward, then we have every reason to believe that those mechanisms of accountability do not exist. I hope that that this time it's different, but we do not know. But the one thing that is different this time round is the public political consciousness. And I think the point that was raised by the previous guest is really important here, which is that Israel is becoming a political burden for politicians within the US. And given that, as we can see from the details of this ceasefire, of this agreement, the power imbalance is so extreme. It's extreme militaristically, financially, politically between the Palestinians and the Israelis. Therefore, the one point of leverage that we can have is by continuing to make the unconditional support of Israel and the ongoing complicity of our nation states, of our governments, in Israeli violation of Palestinian sovereignty, to continue to make that a political burden. That is the one thing that is different this time compared to others. And so that is the lever of hope that we have, that this will not play out exactly as it has historically.
Incredibly insightful. I absolutely agree. The consciousness that's been had across, especially the United States, with regards to lobbying firms such as AIPAC, for example, which have exposed the links between the interests of Israel and the United States, right? The America First movement's understanding that they are sending billions of dollars to Israel whilst they can't get healthcare. This should be America First, and it isn't. These are the kind of things that never really go away, especially when the kind of people who've really been, who've lived through the kind of American foreign policy mistakes that are the first time they've done so, a lot of older people, they lived through Afghanistan and Iraq, but this is for a lot of young people in the United States especially, their first real showing of what America does abroad, and understanding that, again, it's just like for us, we in the UK, like I grew up as a child learning about what we did in Iraq, and that fundamentally has shaped my opinion of British foreign policy. And I'm sure there are a lot of Americans, both on the left and the right, who will see what Israel has done at the behest of the United States as it's, again, the Western settler state in the region, that will only be fermented in people's brains in terms of how they view the Israel and American relationship. I do think what is interesting too is that clip that we saw of Americans praising Trump specifically and how he is the president who got them the hostages back. And it shows everybody really, that Joe Biden could have done this. All of that favor that he could have curried with the Israeli public, who did want the hostages back for a very long time, a man who declares himself as a committed Zionist and has always been one, who always says he stands with the Israeli people, he didn't take the chance that he could have done to get the hostages back that Israel wanted. It took one talk from Steve Witkoff in February to release some of them before Israel broke the ceasefire last time. And it's taken a little bit more kind of transactional politics, but at the very least pressure from the State Department and the White House to get this ceasefire deal over the line too. And of course, as has always been the case, the American president always has this leverage with the Israeli prime minister. It happened between Reagan and Menachem Begin. One phone call is all it took. And that is what it could have been with Joe Biden. He could have been the savior of the people that he claims that he supports. And yet he was too interested in supporting Israel's military action in the region, of essentially jumping as high as the Netanyahu government told him to jump, rather than actually doing something that would be in his own personal interest. And at the very least, we can see that the transactional nature of Trumpian politics does at least lead to, in some respects, a little bit more rational decisions when it comes to the Israel and US relationship. Now, the world will be hoping for a ceasefire that lasts, one that may even turn into a peace deal, and that may still be a long way off, with the road to this point already having taken many twists and turns. The drive towards a truce appears to have picked up steam after Israel launched an airstrike on a residential area in US ally Qatar's capital Doha, hitting a building in which Hamas peace negotiators were meeting in an attempt to assassinate them. That attack was strongly condemned by the Emir of Qatar, who called it a flagrant violation of its sovereignty and security, and a clear violation of the rules and principles of international law. And US President Donald Trump did not seem best pleased either, saying he was, quote, not thrilled by the attack, and promising Qatar it would never happen again. And that's geopolitically important. Qatar houses one of the largest US military bases in the entire region, meaning that Israel had made a mockery of the kind of security guarantees the presence of such a base is meant to represent. And the international community also appeared to stress that finally Israel had gone too far, not because of the genocide or the mass slaughter in Gaza, of course, or indeed annexing Palestinian territory, but because it had struck out at a Western ally. In the aftermath of the attack on Doha, Britain, Canada, Australia, and France all formally recognized the state of Palestine, much to Israel's fury. They were joined by several others, so that by late September, 4 out of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council had recognized Palestine, leaving only the United States as failing to do so. At this stage, 81% of the UN member states recognized the country also. In late September, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visited the White House. That's where, in a joint press conference, Trump and Netanyahu announced Trump's 20-point Gaza peace plan. But it was also where Netanyahu was made to grovel. During a 3-way phone call with the Emir of Doha from the White House, Netanyahu formally apologized to Qatar for the airstrike and promised that Israel would never conduct such an attack again. Now, I mentioned the 20-point Trump plan unveiled at that White House meeting from Netanyahu. Besides what has been agreed in today's ceasefire, it also includes the disarmament of Hamas, the de-radicalization of the Palestinian population in Gaza, and a temporary technocratic government led by Trump, but including former British Prime Minister Tony Blair on its board. It also guarantees no forced displacement of Palestinians, a future Palestinian government without Hamas involvement, and no Israeli occupation. All of those steps are a very long way off, But following the White House meeting with Netanyahu, Trump set a deadline of the 5th of October, that is indeed last Sunday, for Hamas to agree to the plan or, quote, be killed, saying he would support Israel in doing what it has to do. Hamas met that deadline 3 days early, not by agreeing the whole deal, but parts of it. In a statement, the group said last Friday it was ready to release the remaining hostages, adding this. The movement affirms its readiness to immediately enter into negotiations through the mediators to discuss the details of this agreement. The movement also renews its agreement to hand over the administration of the Gaza Strip to a Palestinian body of independence, the Technocrats, based on Palestinian national consensus and Arab and Islamic support. In other words, the future of Palestine regarding temporary governance would have to have the support of the Palestinian people, and wasn't a decision for Hamas. Those mediated negotiations took place this week. Dropsite News had the inside track on how they went, reporting this. Multiple sources from Hamas and other Palestinian factions have told Dropsite that their central concern in these negotiations was that handing over all Israeli captives would remove nearly all of their leverage if it did not include a complete Israeli withdrawal. Israel has, as a matter of policy, systematically violated its ceasefire agreements with Hamas and also with Lebanon. In entering into these negotiations, Hamas negotiators accepted they were engaging in a high-stakes gamble. This is a risk, but we trusted President Trump to be the guarantor of all of the commitments made, said Musa Abu Marzouk, a senior Hamas leader, in an interview with Dropsite on Monday. Had there been no commitment from the American president, we would never have agreed to take the risk, because we do not trust Netanyahu or his extremist right-wing team in the current Israeli government. Trump may have had external motives for pushing so hard on this deal and for guaranteeing that Israel observes its terms. Dropsite reports this. A senior Hamas official told Dropsite that the Palestinian negotiators have faced unprecedented pressure from Arab and Islamic mediators over the past 48 hours to make significant concessions and to quickly reach an agreement on all aspects of Trump's plan, and that they addressed the exchange of captives, the ceasefire, and the resumption of aid. Trump is very eager for the Nobel Peace Prize, and therefore he wants the problem solved today or tomorrow so that the votes will be in his favor for receiving the Nobel Peace Prize, Abu Marzouk told Dropsite News. Before the deal was announced last night, Trump trailed it in a dramatic moment during a press conference after Secretary of State Marco Rubio handed him a handwritten note with the words very close underneath.
To find the criminal conspiracy.
Okay. I'm just giving... Yeah, I was just given a note by the Secretary of State saying that we're very close to a deal in the Middle East, and they're going to need me pretty quickly, so I will take a couple of more questions. I have to go now to try and solve some problems in the Middle East, although I'm very well represented by our Secretary of State. He could probably do an even better job than me, but who knows? We don't want to take any chances, so we're going to go and do that.
And this is how Netanyahu described the deal after it was announced last night. With the approval of the first phase of the plan, all our hostages will be brought home. This is a diplomatic success and a national and moral victory for the state of Israel. From the beginning, I made it clear, we will not rest until all our hostages return and our goals are achieved. Through steadfast resolve, powerful military action, and the great efforts of our great friend and ally President Trump, we have reached this critical turning point. Now, it is quite interesting that in that statement he only really recognizes the first part of the plan, which does allude to the idea that that's the only part that he really cares about, which is getting the hostages home and satisfying the interests of the Israeli public to court political favor. But also interesting as well that he's talking about Trump there specifically, showing that there is this transactional relationship between the two. It is clearly Netanyahu wanting to please Trump and also please the citizens of Israel, whilst ensuring that, at least from that statement, for what I can at least glean from what he said there, that there is at least some leverage that he has to look towards some kind of conflict in future and more military action once the actual first phase has been completed and he gets what he actually wants out of this exchange, which is to curry favor internally in Israel. Now, even before Israel's cabinet met to vote on the ceasefire, some in the cabinet were making their displeasure known. Israel's finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, made it pretty clear he was not for peace, posting this. A tremendous responsibility to ensure that this is not, God forbid, a deal of hostages in exchange for stopping the war, as Hamas thinks and boasts, even if under better starting conditions than what was previously offered to us, and that immediately after the hostages return home, the state of Israel will continue to strive with all its might for the true eradication of Hamas and the genuine disarmament of Gaza, so that it no longer poses a threat to Israel. which again, it shows you what the whole point of this was about. Like, military action was never going to return the hostages. It was never intending to return the hostages, and it never did return many hostages at all. The only real way that they've had any hostages released was through ceasefire, was through negotiation, was through mediated negotiation with people from Hamas. And the military action is being done to, as we've known from the statements by Smotrich, from what I can see and what you can read into the statements there by reading between the lines, is that the military action should continue as long as possible, because that gives the biggest chance for them to be able to annex land in Gaza, even if that is against the wishes of the American president. Of course, Smotrich doesn't have that leverage on him that Trump has over Netanyahu as a junior coalition partner. Around the world, however, leaders have treated the announcement as a done deal. This was British Prime Minister Keir Starmer.
This is a moment of profound relief that we felt around the world, but particularly for the hostages, their families, and for the civilian population of Gaza, who have all endured unimaginable suffering over the last 2 years.
Or at least he managed to remember to say hostages this time. But when it comes to the statement that he's made there, again, like, if it actually had been a relief for you, you would have done literally anything more than the nothing that you've done so far to try and secure this in the first place. As Trita Parsi rightly pointed out earlier in the show tonight, like, Europe could have had a more vociferous set of actions and principles against Israel in ensuring that it wasn't entirely down to the United States. But just as Israel is a client state of the United States, so is the UK in our special relationship, especially with Sir Tricom at the helm, where fundamentally our foreign policy is set by the US State Department. We don't have it being independent. That's a point we have made on this channel for the last 2 years and indeed before, which shows you again that if we really wanted to have any actual action, if this statements that have been made about the relief that he sees here were in any way sincere, we would have seen more action than what the literally nothing that we have done up until this point, outside of token gestures and virtue signaling around sanctions on individuals rather than the broader occupation in the West Bank and the genocide in Gaza that we had seen so far from Keir Starmer. So pretty empty words from him there. Dalia, what have you made of the reactions that we'd seen there?
Just when I feel like I've reached my edge, I end up somehow watching a Keir Starmer video and just being like, oh no, there's more room for me to be pissed off and you know, furious. So is the only downside of doing this job, which I love. I do love this job, but the one downside is that I have had to watch so much more Keir Starmer videos than I would have otherwise had to. I mean, look, it's very important to look at what is happening right now through the eyes of the Israeli state. It is very, very clear that the goals of the Israeli state from the 8th of October onwards has been nothing to do with the release of Israeli hostages. If they really cared about the release of Israeli hostages, they would have complied with previous ceasefire agreements, and they wouldn't have razed Gaza to the ground and blocked aid from getting into the Strip. Because when you block aid to Palestinians in Gaza, you are also inevitably also blocking aid that would have gone towards Israeli hostages. So the Israeli hostages are just seen as basically foregone casualties of the broader strategic role that Israel has, the broader strategic aim that Israel has, which is the one that is expressed by Ben-Gvir. Now, I know that Ben-Gvir, Netanyahu is, of course, because he is the prime minister, is positioned as a slightly more kind of diplomatic voice than Ben-Gvir, but these two work in symbiosis with one another. When you scratch the surface, both Netanyahu and Ben-Gvir have the exact same overall goal, which is to empty the Palestinian territories of the vast majority of Palestinians. They may, be happy to keep some Palestinians on as maybe low-wage labor in their future vision of Israel, which would be from the river to the sea, which is what the Israeli state wants. I mean, they call it Judea and Samaria. This is not something that is just a provincial position of Ben-Gvir. It's just that Ben-Gvir is more kind of dramatic in his expression of that aim and doesn't try to hide behind diplomatic language. But in doing so, he creates the space for Netanyahu to then be the kind of more strategic person when it comes to actually trying to achieve the same goal. So if the overall goal, as we know, is to empty the strip of Palestinians and to annex the land of Gaza, and then which will eventually then also extend to the West Bank, then, I'm sure that the way that they perceive this is, we've agreed to a peace deal that will involve the return of the hostages, which will also kind of allay some of the domestic unpopularity that Netanyahu has within Israel. And there is no internal mechanism of accountability when it comes to what will happen if Israel violate this deal, as they have done historically. And then you have this thing, which is this council that is going to be governing the Gaza Strip. It seems to, and obviously the existing structure is that it is going to be led by Donald Trump. It's going to include presence from Tony Blair, whose qualifications for the role is that he knows very much how to break the fabric of an Arab state and reorient it in line with US and European oil interests. That is basically his qualification for the role. And then you have a transition to the Palestinian Authority. That is kind of the overall structure. And I think that the Israeli state sees that as a process that will be very easy to manipulate and very easy. Doesn't feel like a considerable block to their overall goal of having effective full annexation of the Gaza Strip. I think what might be interesting over the next few years is perhaps a more discontent between the US and the Israelis, not over what is happening with the Palestinians, but rather over who gets dibs on the Gaza Strip. Is the Gaza Strip primarily the remit of US capitalists and the US state, or is it primarily the remit of Israeli capitalists and Israeli states? How will they carve up the Gaza Strip in their vision of, a post-deal Gaza? Now, obviously, none of this is a foregone conclusion, and that there is still scope for particularly civil society, for people all throughout the world to continue to exercise their political pressure and to continue to make the support of Israel a political burden and a stigmatized position. And that is why, it's very important, because not many people will have this context. For many people who have been very moved by what has been happening in Gaza, they will open their newspapers and see, peace deal has been reached. Great, now we can kind of move on. And it's very important for those of us who have that broader context, who have that broader history, to continue to make it very clear that Palestinian sovereignty is non-negotiable, and that anything that is violating that Palestinian sovereignty is unacceptable and intolerable to freedom and peace-loving people throughout the world. And so that's our role. It's a difficult conditions. We are in difficult conditions to continue that role. But of course, history is made by man, but it's not made in circumstances of our own making. These are not circumstances of our own making. These are not the circumstances that we would choose, but these are the circumstances that we are given. And it's very important that we have ultimate clarity on what actors are at play right now: Blair, Trump, an expansionist Israeli state, and what our role is as civil society, as a global population whose consciousness on this issue is higher than it has ever been at any other historical moment. I would argue that is the lay of the land as we stand.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the interesting thing as well, as they talked about before about the de-radicalization in the agreement of the Palestinians. And I'm like, well, there's plenty of radicals in Israel. There are a plurality of the Israeli public supported the total emptying of the Palestinian territories of Palestinians. This is a society that has been gripped by genocidal mania for 2 years, as well as being pretty brutal upon the Palestinians before then, which we, again, haven't even spoken up. since the action started in October the 7th and the genocide began, the discussions of what was happening in the year of 2023 before that date, the incursions into places like Jenin, the gassing worshippers in the Al-Aqsa compound. These were all ways in which Israel was terrorizing the Palestinian at the behest of its own population. These were things that were supported by the Israeli population. And it will take a concerted effort globally, as you say, of maintaining this pressure upon our positions, of the open discussion of what Israeli society has become, and for the people who've been radicalized against Israel in the West to keep up that pressure against our elected representatives to actually see that this becomes a just peace settlement rather than the only peace settlement that was left on the table. Again, we're going to be seeing, just like we've seen in Ukraine, the free market capitalists wanting to swoop in and be able to make their bonanza in the redevelopment of the areas that have been brutalized by both conflicts. So that will obviously be the interests of many of the parties involved in future governance of the Gaza Strip and indeed in the West Bank as well. Obviously, plenty of destruction in the West Bank too, obviously to not nearly the same extent. And so we're going to need to ensure that without that pressure, it will just become another real estate bonanza, as was called by plenty of people on the Israel-US axis in these negotiations. And of course, more broadly, if we want to see actual justice for the Palestinian people, an end to the occupation, we cannot at any point let up the pressure on our politicians that have been complicit, not only in the genocide from October the 7th until today, but the continual decades-long occupation of Palestine by Israel and by Zionism. And that will involve ensuring that our politicians do not feel like that they can take our support for granted. Before we move on to our next story, a quick reminder about our upcoming IRL event next Monday, 13th of October at Earth Theatre in Hackney. Aaron Bastani will be joined by British-Palestinian journalist and Novara media contributor Kieran Andreou. He'll be speaking publicly for the first time about his recent experience in Israeli detention following his time on the global Sumud flotilla. Aaron will also be in conversation with Palestinian voices behind the new book, Gaza, the Story of a Genocide, Yara Eid, Ahmed Al-Hanouk, and Tarek Bakoni. Copies of the book will be available to purchase on the night, and 50% of all proceeds from the event will be donated to medical aid for Palestinians. We'd love for you to join us. You can grab your ticket by following the link in the chat or in our bio. Who at home remembers Keir Starmer saying this?
You made 10 policy pledges for this campaign. Let's see how watertight they are. Can you guarantee that under your leadership, the 2019 Labour commitments to nationalise water, energy, rail, the Royal Mail, they'll all be in Labour's next election manifesto?
I've made that commitment.
Now, as you all know, a Keir Starmer pledge is essentially worthless. But it still stings that we've had years and years of water companies dumping sewage into our rivers and charging us extra for the privilege. And by charging you extra for the privilege, I mean that quite literally. Ofwat, the now abolished water regulator that had been given the green light to bill hikes earlier this year, has just been overridden by a panel for the Competition and Markets Authority to allow 5 of the private water companies to hike bills yet again above what was agreed by Ofwat. The BBC reports this. The companies, Anglian, Northumbrian, Southern Wessex and South East, had asked for permission to raise bills by more than the amount previously agreed by the regulator Ofwat. They argued that the rises set by Ofwat, which were averaged 36% over the next 5 years, were not enough to deliver better infrastructure. A panel appointed by the Competition and Markets Authority, the CMA, has now said that the bills can rise on average by an extra 3%, about £12 per year, partly due to the companies facing higher borrowing costs. Wow! If only there was some kind of large entity that could take over these failing water companies who had access to the cheapest credit possible. Maybe also it could be, democratically accountable, given there is no competition in a natural monopoly. So there needs to be another mechanism to hold them to account, given that water demand is inelastic. I can't imagine such a thing. So in the current system, bill payers are being asked not just to finance the infrastructure upgrades these companies should have been doing and have not been doing for the last 30 years, bill payers also have to finance the interest on the debt they have to accrue because they failed to set aside enough money already to do it, and have instead been paying sky-high directorial salaries and shareholder dividends, and on top of that, paying fines to the state for the tons of sewage they've discharged. Here's how the CEO of Water Industry Trade Union, or Trade Association rather, Water UK, David Henderson, defended the decision.
Each company is a little bit different, but on average, it's an extra £1 per month per household across the country in those areas.
Yeah, so about £12 or something more than that per year. Now, what will concern listeners is they might like the idea of extra investment, fewer leaks, less sewage in rivers and seas, but they think, well, why can't you guys pay for it? Why can't the shareholders take the hit rather than it being the consumers taking the hit again?
Well, shareholders have put a lot of their own money into the system. It's why 8 companies actually made a loss last year. And average returns are under 3%, less than you get in a high street bank for a fixed term deposit right now. But this infrastructure is vital for our economy. It does need to be paid for. Investors have choices. They don't have to put their money into this sector. They don't even have to put it into this country. So unless we get that investment, we're not going to have our economy able to grow and our environment able to be in a better condition.
Interesting admission there that it is necessary to grow the economy to have this investment. And the investors could go anywhere. They don't have to put their money in, which is right. They don't have to put the money in. They never needed to put the money in unless there was pressure from the state for them to do so, because as it's a natural monopoly, you can't go elsewhere to get your water. And indeed, you don't really have a choice because water is necessary to be able to exist as a human being. That you don't have a choice. If you have a shitty water company who's not putting in the money to invest in upgrades to be able to ensure that the actual delivery of this incredibly important part of our daily lives is done efficiently and cheaply and without sewage discharge and leaks, then you don't really have a choice if they don't do that, because you only have the one potential retailer to your house. Because again, it's a natural monopoly. If, for example, as I mentioned before, that we had a state in control of this, then it would be done on democratic accountability. If a government who owned the public utilities didn't invest, it didn't provide a better service, then they would get voted out. That is far better a safety valve on the failure to invest. Again, for the last 30 years, the last reservoir was built in 1992 in this country, let it be remembered, which they haven't done, to try and cry foul, say, oh no, but the shareholders have put in so much money to invest, like, you can't really expect them to do any more, and they're making a loss. I'm like, well, tough shit. It was your job. It was your job as water companies to do this investment when it was put into your hands at bargain basement prices by the Thatcher administration. That was their job. And to cry foul about the idea that they're being asked to cough up money and then to try at least get some extra money out of the people during a cost of living crisis where bills are already sky high, it's incredible, really, just how much these people think that they are owed from this country. And this isn't the start of things, right? This is just the start of things too, insofar as the demand for water and therefore the price for water will only be going up given all of the billions and billions of pounds of investment in data centers is going to apparently come to this country, and part of the making us an AI global superpower from this government who use absolute buckets. Huge amounts of water is going to get used, pushing up the prices for everybody and applying even more strain upon this already crumbling infrastructure. And again, who is to blame for this lack of infrastructure? Is the companies that have been in control and done nothing. Now, even though Starmer has given up on his empty pledge for water nationalisation, there is at least one party in England and Wales who wants us to have full public ownership of water and significantly lower bills that citizens already enjoy over in Scotland. One of Zach Polanski's main pitches is the Greens' commitment to water nationalisation, a key dividing line between the insurgent left-wing party and the current government. Also worth noting, it has been floated by Reform UK as well, at least in part, by having half state and half UK pension fund owned water companies. If Keir Starmer needed any impetus to realise what this pincer movement from the right and the left look like, you should probably have a look at this poll that dropped today. Reform UK are still way ahead of the pack on 32%, but the Green Party have surged to 15%, only 2 points behind the Labour Party. This would mean total collapse for Labour and the Conservatives as well, with stats for lefties predicting only 54 and 21 seats each, respectively. And this is what happens, right? You get in promising change. The single issue that dominated the 2024 election and still dominates politics to this day is the cost of living. Everyone knows we're getting ripped off. There's been great studies showing the huge extra cost of privatisation, right? £250 per year going into the coffers of shareholders because of the privatisation premium across the whole gamut of public utilities that got privatised during the Thatcher administration, right? This government has had at least all of the political goodwill in this country when they gave them the chance to give us the change and to fix the cost of living crisis. And what are they allowing? They're allowing the private water companies to rip off people even more, to make the bills go up. It's incredible, really. Like, sure, we may see a reduction in sewage flows because of some of the very small measures been taken by DEFRA from the new government. But fundamentally, people need to see their bills go down. And if they don't, if they continue to see the cost of living crisis get worse and worse, which according to left-wing think tanks and economists will continue to get worse for the bottom 10% in this country. The bottom 10% of households are predicted to have a lower living standards at the end of this parliament at the start under a Labour government, shows you that populists will be waiting in the wings, and quite frankly, should be waiting in the wings, given how many lobbyists are on the benches of the Labour Party at current time of recording. Dalia, this all seems like a mess for Keir Starmer of his own making, indeed of the water company's own making, that requires some actual bold solutions. What do you think?
The irony is that the solutions aren't that bold. I mean, we are the outlier here when it comes to having a fully privatized water system. I mean, water privatization is probably one of the most acute and bleak examples of how people in this country are having the piss taken out of them by capitalists. And by this country, I mean specifically England and, of course, Wales, because as you mentioned, Scotland does not have this problem of a fully privatized water system. And for this, the problems here are all the ones that you have mentioned. This does not operate like a normal private company. It is not subject to market competition. It is a captive market. So it is neither subject to the accountability of the consumer or the accountability of the electorate. So it is a completely unaccountable system where the shareholders and water bosses have basically are governing one of the most important resources for humanity, which is water. One of the most the essential resource. They have got total control of it with absolutely no mechanism of accountability and the ability, it seems, to raise prices till kingdom come as they please. It has failed completely on its own metrics. The service is shit. It's inefficient. The prices are just getting higher and higher. And what I find so unbelievable about the fact that we still, in 2025, have a fully privatized water system, despite the fact that basically every country and every city that experimented with water privatization in the 1980s has reneged on that because it is such an obvious scam and such an obvious abuse of power, of infrastructural power. The idea that we still have that is so unbelievable to me because it was the most perfect low-hanging fruit for Keir Starmer. On a policy level, it's not particularly complex. There are literally precedents all over the world for a fully nationalized, or even if you're going to be conservative, a partly nationalized water system. Although, of course, I don't see why there's any reason to not go fully nationalized. But there's precedent all over the world. England, Wales, and Chile are the only 3 countries in the world that have a fully privatized water system. So there's nothing but policy precedent. It's not a particularly complex thing to imitate. And it is a policy move that would immediately be felt by the British public. If what you're trying to build is good political will, if what you're trying to build is a sense in people that their lives are on the road to getting better, after for the past 15 years we have been used to this incremental managed decline, this idea that something could get better, I think it's difficult to overestimate, how far just that little bit of political goodwill could go, especially when you're trying to fight off a right-wing populist party. So it is such a low-hanging fruit that I cannot believe that Keir Starmer has still not taken advantage of. And to me, it just goes to show the extent to which the Labour Party is captured by private interests, the extent to which the Labour Party is unable to de-link itself from private interests, to the extent that they would sink their own ship in order to keep one private industry going. And of course, the other reason is that we do have a notorious revolving door between Labour Party MPs and the water lobbying industry. It's a particularly, the water lobby is a particularly favoured position for people who really fucked up at being a Labour MP. So like if you were a real loser Labour MP, you were unpopular, you did nothing, you barely got anything out of the job, the water lobby will take you and will pay you very handsomely and make it very worth your time. So yes, there is this kind of revolving door between the water industry and Labour Party, which is why Labour is willing to sink its own electoral viability in order to protect this industry. But also it's a structural problem with the Labour Party. You know, when Clause 4 was amended under Tony Blair, that was a shift in the Labour Party where the Labour Party was no longer a socialist party. It was no longer a party that had fundamental guiding principles, one of which is the nationalisation of public utilities. Others include, support of the labour movement, having deep relationships with the unions. When that shift was made, what you ended up with is the Labour Party and the Conservative Party basically being two sides of the same coin that career politicians would flip and decide where their political home would be on. So once that happened, if what all you wanted was to be a career politician, to have, the red carpet rolled out for you for the rest of your life, to have high-paying corporate jobs for life, and to have political power, there was barely any distinction between the Labour Party and the Conservatives, to the point where you would just, I am sure, obviously, this is alleged, but I am sure that the likes of Wes Streeting, the likes of Keir Starmer, all these people, when it came to selecting what party they would run for, they flipped a coin and it landed on Labour. And that kind of structural shift in the purpose of the Labour Party, which is why we have ended up with a party that is so toothless in the face of private industry, is both a feature of this particular rotating door between private companies, private interests, and Labour Party politicians. But it's also down to the structural principle-based shift that happened to the Labour Party in the 90s, which basically meant that both the Labour and the Conservative Party were pro-private interest. One had a little bit more concessions in terms of the social contract towards workers, but fundamentally, their primary loyalty would lie with the most established corporate interests.
Yeah, the Water UK, the trade association CEO that we listened to earlier, the previous CEO for Water UK was Ruth Kelly, who was a minister in the new Labour government. Shows you how deep those links go. And if you want to understand just how much money there is in owning critical infrastructure, famously Michael Burry, the man who predicted the 2008 financial crash, after betting against the housing market, he invested in water. Is it any wonder why? Before we go to our final story, it's Thursday, which means one thing. Tomorrow morning, every one of you who's signed up to our most popular newsletter, The Cortado, will get Ash's freshest take of the week delivered straight to your inbox. But that's not all. We recently expanded The Cortado, and Novara's very own Stephen Methan is taking the reins every Monday morning. So sign up today to make sure you don't miss either of them by heading to novara.media/The Cortado, or by following the link in the chat or the link in bio. Now, it's not just a new Cortado that Novara Media has for you this week. We also have a very important and revealing new report from Calais premiering tomorrow. Take a look.
The United Kingdom is being invaded.
Personne ne parle français?
The police tear gas regardless of the people that they encounter.
The boat is full of people, so they can't breathe and they die like this.
These are just desperate people who are in a situation that has made them desperate.
I don't care anymore.
The UK is kind of their last hope.
You can watch that vital report, The Truth About Small Boats, on the channel from 11 on Friday morning. The link is in the description below. Where have all the white people gone? This was the question on the right-wing's lips ever since Tory grandee Robert Jenrick declared that on a visit to a Birmingham town he didn't see a single white face. We covered his comments on the show on Tuesday, but in summary, Jenrick had travelled to the Birmingham town of Handsworth to do one of his trademark videos opining about his petty annoyances and about the state of the nation. This one in particular, however, was a video for GB News as part of their Stop Trashing Britain campaign, which Birmingham has been notorious for, given the long-running industrial dispute between refuse workers and the council. The clip was resurfaced 8 months later after a leaked audio of Jenrick was released, where he claimed in his time in Handsworth he didn't see a single white face, sparking a nationwide debate about what integration looks like and whether or not Jenrick's comments were even reflective of the state of Handsworth at the time. Well, on that note, the keen eyes at the local Birmingham Dispatch had been scouring the original video in question, and it seems to directly contradict Jenrick's comments. The first clip appears to show white people on camera in both the foreground and the background, and the second clip shows two people walking behind Jenrick as he does a piece to camera. Their faces are blurred there, as you can see, but the infallible technology at GB News allows us to see one of them for a split second. Birmingham Dispatch screenshotted that moment to make it clear. Well, I will leave it up to them to describe what you're seeing there. The Dispatch did some geolocating, i.e. we went to Handsworth and used our eyes to ascertain that this portion was filmed at the corner of the Broadway and Maidstone Road. And who is that behind Jenrick as he stands on the junction? A woman who seems to be, without getting too race sciencey, white. So, is Jenrick blind, lying, or just stupid? Well, I'll let you be the judge of that at home. What I will say, however, is if you go to the comments on the original video, all you will see is a deluge of Islamophobia. Comments around importing slums and inferior cultures, Muslims not having respect for the United Kingdom, etc., etc. So people like Jenrick have an incentive to imply that there couldn't be any white people in the area to be blamed for littering and fly tipping, allowing racist narratives like this to fester. This is despite the fact that the reality is that areas like this have been vandalised by austerity for 15 years and, of course, deindustrialisation for 46 years. Rishi Sunak literally bragged about diverting money away from poorer urban constituencies like Handsworth and towards places like the much richer in the Royal Tunbridge Wells. I believe that clip was filmed. But admitting fault in Whitehall, especially for committed Austerians like Jenrick, would be unthinkable. Much easier to blame and scapegoat minorities instead. Dalia, of course, all of Robert Jenrick's seeming inability to look at the actual footage that he filmed there is quite funny. But the reality of what this actually is a lot darker given the response to his comments and the response to the individual and the response to the video in question. What's your thoughts?
I don't know what to say, because what we have here is a de facto leader. I know Kemi Badenoch is technically the leader of the Conservative Party, but in terms of public status, it feels like Robert Jenrick has seen, he seems to have a lot more airtime of, one of the biggest the second biggest party in this country, is essentially equating the presence of black and brown faces with moral and civilization decline. I mean, it's old, like really old school racism. And it's being articulated with very little pushback. It's become normal to basically see a place that is maybe got more than 50% of black and brown people in it, and to say that this is a place of civilizational decline, and to associate white faces, regardless of who those white faces are. I mean, you don't even know if they they could be European, they might not even be British. But to just to equate white faces with safety, goodness, cleanliness, development. I mean, it's old school colonial racism. And I think that it's also I also find this whole language of Britain being invaded and taken over by people, foreigners who have no respect for the way things are, no respect for the culture. And the thing is with racism is that so often racism is a projection, and it is a case of every accusation being a confession, because ultimately people like Robert Jenrick are scared that migrants will do to Britain what Britain did to the world, what Britain did to their countries. Because if we're talking about a country being invaded by a foreign entity, and that foreign entity not only invading the country, but subordinating that country to their economic, cultural, and political vision of the world, and essentially taking over the governance of that country, that's happened. The only place where that has really actually happened is the British Empire. And I think there's this sense of like, if we give them too much freedom, they might do to us what we did to them, because if we were in their position, that's what we would do. And that's what I find so ironic about the way in which this kind of great replacement theory, this, explicitly racist turn in the right, that is what it's giving. It's giving every accusation is a confession. What I would say is that the reason that we are seeing this kind of surfacing of this very explicitly racist politics is grounded in the fact that Britain exists within a contradiction. And that contradiction is that from its inception, Britain has always been a place that has extracted from the other. It has required the other. It has been dependent upon the other. It's been dependent on the labor of the other. It's been dependent on the resources of the other. It has been dependent on those that do not just live within the islands that we call Britain, or those that do not just have generations of families within the island of Britain. And it resents that. It resents that dependence. It wishes that it was not dependent on that its development was not dependent on people that it sees as lesser than, but unfortunately it is. And so what's the end point of this? The end point is not actually to get rid of all migrants or to get rid of people who have migration in their heritage, because Britain would not function without it. And they all know that. They all know, if we're talking about seeing white faces, it's been a hot minute since I've seen a white face doing low wage, awful labor to keep our cities going. It's been a hot minute since I've seen a white face cleaning an office block late at night, And so it relies on that labor, not just of racialized people within this country, but racialized people all throughout the world. And so what it wants is it wants to create a system where, yes, racialized people continue to exist in this country, but they exist as second-class citizens. They don't have access to civic rights in the way that white British people do. And that is the dynamic that they're trying to create. It's not to kick all the foreigners out or the descendants of foreigners. They can't do that, and they don't want to, because ultimately we do the work that they don't want to do, or that there are too many labor shortages that they couldn't fill without us. But they want us to be here and to knowingly be here in a state of second-class citizenship. They don't want us to have the kind of representation culturally, politically, whatever, that is commensurate with our contribution to the country. And that is why we are seeing this both state and street level resurgence of racism. It's to discipline our presence in this country so that we know our place. You'll be here, you'll clean the asses of our elderly parents, you'll drive our buses, you'll do our night shifts, you'll do the brutal work that keeps this country going, but you'll shut up while you do it. That's the ultimate political and social goal.
We had a discussion on the show yesterday around the creeping kind of spectre of fascism in this country. And one of the kind of central ideas of the kind of nationalism, the ultra-nationalism of fascism, was that there was an internal other that was ruining the kind of the body of the people and of the nation state from within. And this rhetoric around people importing inferior cultures, the rhetoric that we're seeing about invasions of migrants, this idea, again, that the country was fine until it was ruined by diversity. Again, this area of the country, Handsworth, has been diverse both in terms of religion and ethnicity for much longer than people have had these kind of mass immigration concerns that they would call it for such a while. And again, it's scary to me that these kinds of rhetoric are being normalized. And that's why I think the Jenrick is a genuinely very worrisome individual as a politician. And I stream quite often with one of my good friends, Kevin Logan, one of the old school anti-SJW YouTubers. And he's from Birmingham and grew up playing football with the people from Handsworth. And all of the different people of all of his different backgrounds, and listen to him talk about his experiences and the kind of people they grew up with and the way in which these people are being demonized, being treated as a microcosm of everything wrong with Britain, it really rubs me up the wrong way. And I think it's very sad that this is the point that discourse has come to in this country. A couple of super chats that you've popped in today. Elphinstone with the £5. Welsh Water is a non-profit. Still have lots of problems with pollution, but at least bill money doesn't go to shareholders, which is, of course, much better. But of course, state-run would mean there'll be democratic accountability, but I get your point. And Elphinstone, the second super chat of £5. Thank you very much. Very generous of you tonight. In light of the ceasefire, what are your thoughts on the best messages for the PSC demo in London on Saturday? Well, first of all, ensuring that the ceasefire does hold, but we have to turn our eyes towards the West Bank. Of course, we can oppose what Tony Blair becoming the new Grand Mufti of Gaza, essentially, the technocratic colonial king. But fundamentally, there will still be expansions of settlements in the West Bank. The settlement plan was passed overwhelmingly in the Knesset. These things have to be virulently opposed. And again, the movement towards Palestinian sovereignty and Palestinian emancipation cannot stop with an end to the genocide. It must stop with the total end of the full occupation across the entire Palestinian territories. Thank you, Dalia, for joining me tonight.
Thanks for having me, Helena. Pleasure as always.
Much appreciated as always. Likewise. Thank you everyone for tuning in. We'll be back tomorrow from 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.